Okay, now let's see how the court ruled on this the Gun-Free School Zone Act. The ruling of the court in the case was that this Gun School Free Zone Act was unconstitutional. Okay, a point we must make clear here is this: from the 1930s until the decision of this case, that is U.S. versus Lopez in 1995. That means before 1995. Okay, from 1930s until 1995, the court actually accepted this broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause. All right, so that's why in the 1960s, and then Congress passed this Civil Rights Act, and then under this Commerce Clause, and then that caused no problem because the court then accepted this broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause. But starting from this U.S. versus Lopez, the court said we are no longer going to accept this broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause. The court said, of course, the concern is, the court said if you interpret this Commerce Clause in this broad fashion, the federal government will take powers away from the states. Okay, just like this regulating of schools. This school regulation. According to this original constitution, that should be the power exercised by the states. But now, because you want to interpret this Commerce Clause in such broad fashion, you're talking about these textbooks, you're talking about these school supplies, you're talking about the food in cafeteria, and then you want to grab this power from the state, you want to regulate this school education. The court said that is not appropriate, that is not inconsistent with this original design of the Constitution. So that's why the court in this U.S. versus Lopez actually struck down this Gun-Free School Zone Act because the court said we cannot accept this broad interpretation of a Commerce Clause anymore. The court said from now on, if the federal government wants to pass a law under the Commerce Clause, the activity that is regulated must be a commercial activity. All right. If this activity is a commercial activity, of course, Congress can regulate that. That is interstate commerce. For example, if we're talking about this construction of interstate highways, of course, that is interstate commerce. If you want to build a highway between New York and New Jersey, and then, of course, that is interstate commerce, and Congress can regulate that. Or if we are talking about this cross-state borders transportation by train or by air, it is okay. That is also commercial activity. Congress can regulate that based on this Commerce Clause. But the court said we are not going to accept this argument. You are saying this school cafeteria food or these students' textbooks, they are in the stream of interstate commerce. They are from a different state, and then based on that, you want to come in to regulate school education. The court said we are not going to accept this broad interpretation of a Commerce Clause. So that's why in this case, the court said this Gun School Free Zone Act was unconstitutional because Congress actually did not have the power to pass this law. Okay, how to regulate school, this school operation that should be regulated by the states, not by the federal government. All right, so it is important for us to remember this U.S. versus Lopez is a court decision. From this decision until today, the court actually has maintained the same position. There cannot be this overly broad interpretation of a Commerce Clause. All right, so the next example we want to look at is this Violence Against Women Act. Okay, after this Gun School Free Zone Act, Congress passed another law. That is the Violence Against Women Act. Okay, we all know this violence against women is a serious problem in the country, and this domestic violence, of course, that is a serious problem. But the issue here, once again, is this: if the state is going to pass the law to regulate this domestic violence, to regulate this violence against women, there is no problem. The state can do whatever it wants to do. But can federal government do this or not? But now the federal government wants to pass the law concerning this violence against the women. And then once again, we need to ask this question: if a Congress wants to pass this law, under which power it can pass this law? And then Congress says, under the Commerce Clause, we can pass this law. Why Commerce Clause? The argument is, if we have this because women actually make an important part of the nation's labor force. All right, so of course that is part of the interstate commerce. And then if we have this violence against women, if a woman was assaulted and then could not go to work, of course that is going to affect this national economy. And then in that sense, Congress says it had the power to pass this law. Once again, the court actually struck down this law. Okay, the court said you cannot pass this law because we already said it. You cannot really do this broad interpretation of Commerce Clause. If you want to regulate something under the Commerce Clause and then this activity must be commercial activity, you cannot really say simply because if we have this woman victim, she could not show up at work. And then in that way, this interstate commerce is implicated. The court said you cannot really regulate, you cannot really make that argument anymore. All right? So this is another example of this interstate commerce. And then, but we also want to look at this issue of this constitutionality of this Affordable Care Act. That is Obamacare. All right. So in this Obamacare, the most controversial issue is this issue of individual mandate. That is, according to this Affordable Care Act, everyone must buy this or must have this health insurance. If you have an employer, maybe your employer would buy it for you. But if you do not have an employer, or your employer would not buy this health insurance for you, you must purchase this insurance by yourself. It is mandatory. If you do not do it, by the end of the year, the federal government or the IRS will issue a fine to you. You have to pay a fine because you do not have this health insurance. All right, so it is important for us to know this is the first time in the U.S. history the federal government would force individuals to buy something. Because usually we know if you want to buy something, you can buy something. You don't want to buy something, you don't have to. You want to buy a TV, you can buy it. You don't want to buy a TV, the government cannot say you have to buy a TV and you don't buy it, we're going to fine you. We know we do not have this kind of thing that ever happened in the country. So apparently the issue would be raised whether this individual mandate, whether this individual mandate was constitutional or not. All right. Or another way to ask the question would be, under which enumerated power the federal government can impose this individual mandate to force someone to buy something? Because we said if a federal government wants to do something, it needs to point out in this list of enumerated powers under which power it can do this. All right. Of course, one argument was Congress argued it could pass this law, this Affordable Care Act, or to require this individual mandate under the Commerce Clause. Okay, the argument is, I think now it is already familiar to you, and they argued this hospital operation is in the stream of interstate commerce, and hospital equipments, medical supplies, and these medications, and they could all from different states, and so this hospital operation actually was in the stream of interstate commerce, all right? And of course, if someone does not have insurance, and maybe other people's insurance maybe have to cover the person, that would also, because this insurance is really a national market, and then basically those are the argument made under this Commerce Clause, all right? But you can, I'm sure you can recognize that is still in this line of a broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause, all right? So the case actually went to the U.S. Supreme Court because this Affordable Care Act was challenged in court. The U.S. Supreme Court actually, the ruling of the court actually was this individual mandate could not be justified under the Commerce Clause. So the court actually was consistent. The court said, we are not going to accept this broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause. And then if you want to pass a law to regulate something under the Commerce Clause that has to be a commercial activity, you cannot really talk about this hospital operation and this medical equipments from different states. The court said, we are not going to accept that broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause anymore. All right. So the court actually said this Obamacare Act could not be justified under the Commerce Clause. All right. But it is also important for you to remember the court did not say this Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional. Actually, the court said this Obamacare Act was constitutional. But the court said it was constitutional. It was justified under the power of the federal government to collect taxes. All right? We know federal government can collect taxes. So if someone does not buy this health insurance, and then the IRS will give the person a fine, and then the court said, oh, we just understand this fine is a form of a tax. Because the federal government has this power to collect taxes, so under this power to collect taxes, this Obamacare, this Affordable Care Act was constitutional. Okay, you know this Affordable Care Act actually indeed it is a constitutional. It was constitutional. The court that was the ruling of the court, but it was not under the Commerce Clause. It was justified under the power to collect taxes.